How do we create a risk-free environment to allow for creativity and innovation as we transition to Common Core standards, blended learning, and globally competitive classrooms, while at the same time establishing common goals and assessments? What do our kids need to be successful with the next generation assessments and in these new environments? What type of professional development support structures will best meet our needs moving forward? These were some of the essential questions we tackled over the 3 days of teacher leadership. One thing we know for sure is that innovation is messy, and as we anticipate missteps, I think that's why laughter was invented, we will adapt, grow with one another, and improve upon our work through teamwork and collaboration. The leadership team focused on designing and selecting evidence-centered performance tasks for our first of 3 Common Core District assessments. They will share them with you in greater detail at your staff meetings, and I really want to honor the time and effort that went into this work. Designing something for your colleagues is a huge risk, and even though it's a best first draft and a work in progress, please join me in appreciating our leadership team and Ed Services.
I walked away from the 3 days of collaboration with not only a greater understanding of the Common Core standards for my grade level, but also how we're going to put them into practice. And a phrase that stuck with me is, in the past we have taught a mile wide and an inch deep, and now the focus is going to be a mile deep and an inch wide. And that helps me in math to know that I'm going to be working more with the kids on a greater understanding of their skills and not so focused on just moving through the book. So I'm very excited, and I think it's going to be a great time in education.
After the 3 days of collaborating, I walked away very excited about the new direction our district is going with the transition to Common Core standards. I value the opportunity given to us to change and to experiment. My favorite quote is, "Error recovery, not failure of avoidance." Thank you.
There is now a revolution in education where creativity is just as important as literacy. It's a time for innovation where teachers will customize and personalize their lessons. Collaboration is amplification, and it is no longer where cooperation is an assembly line model because it doesn't make others better.
I want to share these last 3 days with you. I wish that everyone in the whole district could have been here to see and hear David's vision of our new year with blended learning. As a district and a whole team, it's so important for us to be together and share this time with our students. We need to make mistakes and grow together so that we can become an innovative district. We have the opportunity to try out these new websites with our kids and see where it takes us. We are still going to be doing performance tasks and being held accountable, but not necessarily stuck to a pacing guide. So this is a great time for us to grow.
That was a snapshot summary of some of the work and conversations we had during the 3 days of professional development and collaboration and designing. But I want to share some of the conversations that took place prior to that work. And so in order to support innovation, creativity, and a risk-free environment, the district office has to take on a very different role. And traditionally, district offices design what to teach, design benchmarks, enforce pacing guides, select materials, monitor implementation. Sound familiar? But in order to innovate, we have to be more supportive than more managing. And so if you look at some of the ideas around the circle of evolving central office functions, you'll see a very different look for how we support sites. And so what is it that we're supporting and hoping that our innovation teams achieve? And that really is preparing our kids for the workplace. The Common Core standards are designed around skills that will prepare our kids for college and career. And there are many lists that define what those skills are. Here's one by Engage. And even the term 21st century skills is kind of getting out of date. And what I'd rather use is global competencies. What are the skills our kids need to be competitive in the global economy? And so before we go forward, let's go back. This is one of my favorite quotes by one of my favorite people in our history, taken straight from the monument, and you probably can guess that that Jefferson, who knew that we'd have to adapt to a changing world as new knowledge becomes available, was also one of the chief architects of our public school system. And back in 1789, we needed a system in place to preserve democracy and prepare our new generation for manifest destiny. And in order to do that, we had to provide education that was free and public and that brought a skill set for our new nation leaders. That took the place of a one-room schoolhouse, but by the time the 1900s came along, schools were repurposed to prepare for the Industrial Revolution. And so rather than prepare kids individually, we batched them into groups and rows and columns, and the system took the form of the Industrial Revolution as well. By 1957, another political response. Kennedy said the Soviets beat us into space, we need to put a man on the moon. And so it launched a focus on science and mathematics and a diverse set of skills to foster creativity. And by the 1980s, schools were judged based on the variety of offerings. So you saw not just art, but photography, European history, shop, automotive, career tech ed, a lot of different sports and music and band. And I think that we had education right in the 70s and 80s when we were saying that schools needed to provide skills that were diverse and that focused on student interest and allowed them to pursue different opportunities. Because by 2001, we took on a backward step which led us to No Child Left Behind and a focus on accountability and compliance. And so rather than raise the bar, we fixed the bar at proficient and said all students need to be here, and created really a singular definition of what intelligence was. And I think that hurt not just the morale of our system, of our teachers and kids, but our national economy as well. And that's really where the Common Core Standards came from. It's a global response to what's happening around the world. So we focus on the 4 C's, and they're not carrot, color, clarity, cut. It's critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And when we say political response, there's a group called the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development that runs the PISA exams. And this is where you see how the U.S. is 25th in science, it's 16th in reading, etc., etc. And those statistics are staggering because when you think of who's doing education right, you would think that the United States is right on top. But what's happened is we didn't get any worse. What the research shows is that everyone else is just getting better and more competitive. So when you look at the landscape of high school and college graduates, English speaking from first world countries and even third world countries now, we're looking at a global marketplace that our kids are going to have to really get competitive to be successful. And so Andreas Schleicher, he's the one that runs the PISA exams and supervises the OECD. I wanted to share a couple minutes of him talking about what high-performing countries are doing in their public education systems.
In the past, different students were taught in similar ways. High performers on PISA embrace diversity with differentiated pedagogical practices. They realize that ordinary students have extraordinary talents, and they personalize learning opportunities. High-performing systems also share clear and ambitious standards across the entire spectrum. Every student knows what matters. Every student knows what's required to be successful. And nowhere does the quality of an education system exceed the quality of its teachers. High-performing systems are very careful in how they recruit and select their teachers and how they train them. They watch how they improve the performance of teachers in difficulties who are struggling and how they structure teacher pay. They provide an environment also in which teachers work together to frame good practice. And they provide intelligent pathways for teachers to grow in their careers. In bureaucratic school systems, teachers are often left alone in classrooms with a lot of prescription of what they should be teaching. High-performing systems are very clear what good performance is. They set very ambitious standards, but then they enable their teachers to figure out, what do I need to teach to my students today? The past was about delivered wisdom in education. Now the challenge is to enable user-generated wisdom. High performance have moved on from professional or from administrative forms of accountability and control, sort of how do you check whether people do what they're supposed to do in education, to professional forms of work organization. They enable their teachers to make innovations in pedagogy. They provide them with the kind of development they need to develop stronger pedagogical practices. The goal of the past was standardization and compliance. High-performing systems have made teachers and school principals inventive. In the past, the policy focus was on outcomes, on provision. The high-performing systems help teachers and school principals to look outwards to the next teacher, the next school around their lives. And the most impressive outcomes of world-class systems is that they achieve high performance across the entire systems. You've seen Finland doing so well on PISA, but what makes Finland so impressive is that only 5% of the performance variation among students lies between schools. Every school succeeds. This is where success is systemic. And how do they do that? They invest resources where they can make most of the difference. They attract the strongest principals into the toughest schools and the most talented teachers into the most challenging classroom. Last but not least, those countries align policies across all areas of public policy. They make them coherent over sustained periods of time, and they ensure that what they do is consistently implemented.
And so this next step for us in Cajon Valley is based largely on teacher and principal input, stakeholder values, but also research and development around the world and what's working in education systems in highly effective countries. And one of the key findings is that the delivery system of education, very teacher-centric, is no longer relevant. And so the new environment with blended learning that we're looking at, where kids can learn at their own pace, have a personalized curriculum, and be challenged at their correct zone of proximal development, really empowers the teacher to have more interaction with individual students and small groups. And we all know that that's an ideal environment for making a difference in our children's progress. Here's a short clip from KIPP Empower, one of the schools, charter schools that are doing a really good job with blended learning, and a conversation they're having there.
Blended learning means we strategically use staffing as well as computers in the classroom to make sure our students are in small groups for the 4 core content areas.
They're rotating in specific centers and stations. This allows us to differentiate our lesson plans for the students.
The technology in the classroom develops the students' 21st century skills, and because it uses adaptive technology, it will zoom the students forward if they're accelerating, and it'll cycle back if they're struggling.
The computers are not intended to replace the teacher. They're intended to focus our attentions better and more systematically on what are the needs of each of our individual children.
Data really informs which students go into which groups.
The teacher dashboard collects data of how the students are doing in reading, math, writing, and science.
This allows us to identify where students are struggling or falling behind.
By having our students rotate on and off the computers throughout the day and working in small groups with their teachers, they're receiving a much better education and they're loving the learning process.
At KIPP, we're all about results.
From spelling to math to language arts, they're achieving above and beyond.
And that's just one of several models of blended learning that we'll explore, and I'm hoping that lots of teams get interested on our innovation teams and apply to be the first out of the box in our one-to-one digital learning environment. And at this point, I'm not going to play the Randy Nelson clip, but I think that your principals will want to share this. It's a great conversation to start ideas about what collaboration will look like in this next phase of our journey. Thank you.